into it.
Welcome everyone to the boardroom. So today we will be talking about state education versus private education and which is more valuable to a student. Now, we can't just dive straight into the topic because there's two levels of primary analysis to it, right? So the essential analysis happens to be the primary and the secondary sector. That means basically your ordinary level and advanced level examination, school life, and how private tuition will basically affect you while you're going through your O level and A level. At the same time, it is not just about private tuition. We have private schools which teaches local syllabus, but also private institutions which teach Cambridge syllabus, otherwise known as international schools. Apart from this, the secondary layer of analysis happens to be with regards to university, right? You have state university and you have your private university, and from there as well, what would be essentially important for you as a person who's going to step out into your working career, right? So it's a bit of a snowball effect because the first layer of analysis will affect your second more often than not, and your second will affect your work life, right? So to start off with, I believe, in my humble opinion, that as far as possible, if you are capable of studying by yourself while in school or and in university, you are one who is very competent by yourself. That means you don't require external help for any purposes of clarification, getting through certain past paper question hurdles, etc., etc. It also goes to show to you that you're a person who has been paying attention from day one and working from day one. So the thing is, when you go to a private tuition class, what it essentially does to you is, whether we like it or not, it spoon feeds you. It literally gives you the answer to a question. Certain classes do that, certain classes may not. But more often than not, I have heard certain friends of mine tell me that, look, they basically spoon feed children, and that's bad because they tell you basically what the answer is and not how to get to that answer, right? And that's basically the problem because the child can't learn for him or herself. Now, if you go into basically the state education with regards to university, we understand that there is an inherent discrimination whether we like it or not. And I believe that that is something that our speakers will be talking about today. That is all the time for me. Are there any other questions? Rehan?
Yes, Sanjeev. So, with regards to tuition class, do you not believe that tuition classes are also essential for people who prioritize other things within school? For example, in this is the situation in many government schools where if you do sports, you are not there for half of the classes that you have to do. Therefore, tuition classes may be an alternative source of learning, and it may not necessarily be spoon feeding, but actually getting the knowledge because revision and things like that are also important. Do you not believe in this?
Thank you, Rehan. Very valid question. But here's the thing, right? See, when you are incapable, I don't want to call it incapable, but when you have difficulties in trying to delegate your time in such a way where you can prioritize your studies as well as your other external activity within school, that basically is not going to help you in life because it creates this pattern of behavior where when you are incapable of handling yourself by yourself, you will more often than not require outside assistance, and that will trickle down into your university life and probably also into your work life, which is not something that many employees are looking for. So if you are a person who's capable of basically doing your work in school and doing your sports or whatever activity that you can, that is the ideal circumstance. Vishnu, I believe you had a question for a long time.
So you use the word spoon feeding in tuition classes. So what do you mean by spoon feeding? Don't the schools and the tuition classes basically do the same thing, which is teaching? I mean, is there a difference in the techniques or anything? Because it's very subjective, right?
Yeah, so what I meant by spoon feeding, again, I say that it is under certain classes, not literally every class, but what I mean by spoon feeding is that, see, when you learn something in school and you don't understand what you learn and you go to class, clearly what that person teaches in class makes you understand what you couldn't learn in school. So there is something that basically helped you to learn what you learned in school better during the class. Now, that specific something, if that something is a component which you could have done by yourself, that's self-study. And that's why I say that that is more important than learning what that something is from someone else. That is what I'm trying to say. It's not necessarily spoon feeding per se, but it's basically when you're doing a sum, if someone can tell you not just why you have to use a specific formula, but how you can arrive at that formula, that ideally is going to help you. Right? Any other questions? Dojitha?
One small question, rather, a small follow-up on what you asked from what you told Rehan to say, right? Since most employees value things, which are done by self, in your case, let's say, self-studying and whatnot. But in reality, if we look into it, if we look into the professional field and the education field, even if you get, I mean, if a person get an A after so much of self-studying versus someone, who relied on tuition classes, who got the very same grade, at the end of the day, since an A is an A in the eyes of an employee, but rather extracurricular activities such as sports, taking leadership, being prefects, and being presidents of clubs and societies are more valued in the employment field. Don't you think that it's properly righteous for someone who prioritize extracurricular activities but still want to get the very same grade that someone who doesn't do anything else but self-studying to make sure that they get an A do? So don't you think that it'll be pretty unfair if you advise each and every person out there who wants to have that study plus extracurricular life balance to not to go for tuition classes but rather use the little amount of time that you have to self-study and get whatever you can?
Right. So again, this I think boils down into our 21st century challenges, which is essentially being able to be employed, but at the same time, during your school life, having to do, interact and all that and basically have fun. But see, I feel like the thing is, again, in my opinion, if you look at the old days, right? Basically, if I take my parents, my father used to play rugby. I'm not going to mention his school, but he used to play rugby. But at the same time, he did his work, he did his school work, and he's well off right now where he is, and he's provided me, my mother, and basically our family and all that. But my point being is, see, folks before us found a way to basically balance everything. Now that we started a rat race, we've come up to such a puzzle as to how we can balance our extracurriculars with our studies. I believe that, look, if you are a person who believes that an employee is only looking for your A, go for it. Go for your tuition class and everything. But I believe if you want to climb that ladder, that A is not good enough. You need to show character. You need to show compassion. These are things that you can't just show for, just like you can't just randomly show it. It has to be natural. It has to come from you. And that work ethic will be noticed by your employee. And I mean, yes, you might get employed at a place, but the chance of you climbing the ladder might be quite minimal if you don't have that character and if you don't have that kind of ability to basically, go to the next level. So that's all the time for me. I will now hand the floor over to the next speaker.
Yes. So personally, I think this entire private school versus private education versus public education is mostly subjective, because let's see, there are certain kids who are actually capable of doing things on their own and learning things on their own. But on the other hand, there are certain students who are not capable of that. There are certain students who need a certain level of assistance in their work. So I don't think that actually going for tuition or getting extra help can be a bad thing, because let's see, what you learn basically when you go to tuition classes, what happens is like you relearn what you learn at school, right? So I don't think it's like spoon feeding, because at school, you basically learn one person's opinion on certain things. So when you go to a tuition class, you get a second-hand opinion. You get another perspective on the same subject. That way, it helps you to build up your own perspective and compare and contrast and come up with your own answers and come up with your own way of doing things. See, just completely depending on one source is like putting all your eggs in one basket, right? I mean, yes, the speaker before me actually told that people back in the day used to do it like this. They used to balance everything. And why can't our generation do that? Like, obviously, yeah. So back in the day, the generations before us might have you not had those resources. But uh, in the present generation, in the present situation, this is actually more like a rat race, right? Everyone wants to get employed, everyone wants to get ahead of each other. And it's like, so in the present situation, it actually makes you less employable if you don't perform your maximum best, if you don't perform your level best. And if you can get that extra push from going to a tuition class or anything of that sort, why not use the resources you have to get your best potential? Because it's like, let's say that back in the day, a bar of chocolate used to be 1 rupee, and that doesn't mean that you can go to a shop and demand them to give you 100 rupee worth chocolate bar for 1 rupee, right? So I think with the time you should adapt to whatever comes. And I personally believe that going to tuition classes give you some sort of edge and some sort of drive to actually do better. And to I actually got to get to know a lot of people from different ethnicities, different cultures, and I actually got to compare myself and basically become a better version of myself. I got to compare my answers because let's see, if I just stayed home, just went to school, came home, and did my studies by myself, I might think that I'm doing amazing, that I'm scoring really well. Let's say that I got a 90 for a certain subject, but there could be and that might be the highest mark in my class. But when I go to a tuition class, there are people getting 93s, 94s, and marks more than that what I got. So basically, things like that actually encourages you and pushes you to do more rather than, basically just, I think, demotivating you. So I think actually tuition class is not a really bad idea. If you can use the resource, why not use it, right? So I think that's all the time I have. Do I have any questions? Yes, Rehan?
I wish we saw the whole thing about going to a girls' school and a specific group of people. Do you think that maybe it's time in the 21st century and the Sri Lankan society that we are in, that it's time to abolish targeted schools that target a type of population and instead go on with an accepting school like many private institutions actually doing?
That's actually a really good idea. See, even I believed when I was going to school that we're missing out on a lot of things because we actually, till we pretty much like left school, we were living in a bubble basically. We didn't know about other cultures. We didn't know about the people from the opposite gender. So basically, I think that would be a good idea. But yeah, so if I don't think it basically affected me as much, but there are certain people who don't get to move in with everyone and such. So I think that would be a good idea actually. Are there any more questions? Yes, Sanjay.
Basically, you mentioned that, basically when you go for tuition, it basically drives you, it challenges you because you see that in your class, perhaps a guy got 90, right? Whereas in your tuition class, perhaps a person got 93, 94, etc. See, do you not believe that, yes, true enough, you get the drive and that's a good thing? Do you not believe in two narratives that it creates? One, you'll never be content with what you have, you'll always have to be the best. Two, would it not be very exhausting for the child? Because I know people who spend 6 hours in school and then another 6 hours probably in class, and I'm thinking to myself, like, how do you function? Like the sheer ability to stay that long? I don't think our brain capacities were built for so much.
Yeah, Sanjeeva. So first of all, I think the present generation is actually more about doing more. See, when you get your A-level result sheet, it doesn't say whether you went for classes, or whether you just stayed home and did the studies by yourself to achieve that result. So basically, your employer looks at you, your employer interviews you and he doesn't go, oh, did you go for classes or did you just do this by yourself, right? So I think I don't see any harm in doing your best to get the maximum potential that you can give. And also you mentioned that students can get exhausted. So see, I basically went to school for 6 hours. I stayed after school for like 3.5 to 4 hours, and then I went for classes for another 3 hours. See, it depends on the child. If you can't go for classes, don't go for classes. If you can study at home, study at home. But if you can actually manage everything, then just do it. Use your resources, right? And I'll be handing this over to the other speaker.
Hi. So first off, before I start off with my points per se, a small rebuttals from Sanjeeva's as well as Pushme's arguments that were brought out. So first off, maybe if we talk about a combination of Pushme's as well as Sanjeeva's arguments, because the question of socialization, because we got the idea about a homogeneous culture in a certain school. And we can necessarily socialize with people of various social stigma, B, various educational backgrounds and whatnot. So the argument which is brought out there may carried away because of another argument which came up about a student who can necessarily get the very same experience out of extracurricular activities and whatnot. However, since the question about a student not finding enough time to study by himself, to self-study to succeed instead of going for classes, if he or she devotes a lot of time to sports or extracurricular activities or whatnot, he or she has the risk of essentially not getting exactly what you want. And eventually, when you go into go into the job market, when you apply for a job, at the end of the day, just like what Vishmi said, your result sheet is the one that matters, because nowhere out in the result sheet does it mention anything about your extracurricular activities rather than your CV and the barrage of certificates that you have. So the question of you balancing your studies alongside extracurricular activities along with a lot of self-study comes up, because I don't necessarily see an ecological balance between the three of them. If we are to find someone who should balance, who necessarily can balance it, I'm pretty sure this might be a probability of 1 out of a million, because at the end of the day, it's hard. It's out of personal experience, because I've tried it. It kind of backfired me, which is why I had to resort myself, to go into tuition classes, which helped me out a lot. It's basically what a student wants, because if he finds it helpful to gain knowledge and whatnot from tuition classes and all, and if an employee doesn't necessarily find an issue when it comes to finding leadership skills, when it comes to finding organization skills and whatnot, because at the end of the day, you get them out of doing extracurricular activities, you get them out of doing projects at school, not necessarily self-studying and whatnot. I don't necessarily see the so-called importance in relying 100% on self-studying rather than going for tuition classes, which trickles down to my argument about the role of the job market. Because this is the thing, we still have a certain amount of social stigma in the economic sphere as well as the social sphere about how exactly a person who solely relied on tuition classes, not having a school life, not having an extracurricular life, or may have to undergo when it comes to you applying for a job, versus someone who actually went into school, who did a lot of extracurricular activities, who didn't even go for classes or went for classes and whatnot. Because this question comes up, if we talk about tertiary education as well, because this is the thing. The best example out there, if you get a degree from a well-renowned university for engineering, versus someone who gets the very same degree, very same education, it's just the so-called quality of the degree and whatnot. You see a huge wage gap. I'm not even joking. I see a huge wage gap because I've personally seen it. I've seen people who experience the very same thing. The first thing that we have to identify out here is to break the social stigma when it comes to private education. Because at the end of the day, if a person can afford it, if a person doesn't necessarily doesn't want to go to a school, but rather wants to rely totally on private education, might as well give him or her the opportunity of doing so. Because at the end of the day, all what matters out there is that a person has A, the knowledge to get the job done, B, the personal experience to get the job done, and C, the skills and abilities, for someone to climb up the ladder. You can get it out of literally anything. You can get it out, doing interact private, doing road track private, or as you do in the school, because at the end of the day, you're doing the very same thing. So summing up my argument, what necessarily should happen out there is that, in a certain ideal sphere, if you take a child, let's say X should be able to, handle school. X has the sole right and authority to go into classes, because at the end of the day, it's his or her money and his or her time. And, to do extracurricular activities as well, because at the end of the day, when you go into a job market, it's not an ideal phase. It's not an ideal sphere where you necessarily, get marks just because you studied all by yourself, or just because you only did your extracurricular activities, because at the end of the day, everything is required for you to climb up the ladder. So, all in all, my suggestion out there for someone who's watching this is to make sure that you have that balance between extracurricular activities as well as your studies. Rely on private education if you want to, but make sure you have a limit to study by yourself as well, because at the end of the day, that's a little important as well. And to make sure that it all helps you up all in all to join the rat race, which is right now, which is so hard for us to debate, and to, succeed in life. If there are any questions, you can post it now. Rehan?
Yes, Doj, in regards to reliance on tuition classes versus reliance on education with school, right? Do you not believe with all the current context in Sri Lanka, which for some job opportunities, the name of your school also gives you a certain advantage, and going for relying 100% on private tuition would not give you that advantage? Do you not believe that, being a part of a school, learning in a school, even though, education as well might not be there 100%, the name of a school you go to is also very important when an employer does give you a job, because this is the current situation.
Yeah, which is exactly the problem out there, which I discussed right now. Yes, because I'm not supposed to mention names out here, but it's pretty much obvious if you go into a huge, big school in Colombo versus, someone who does private education, who goes for just tuition classes, so an international school where nobody knows about, you see the chances getting low. You see the exposure that person gets, even though, you get the job or not, is pretty low, which should be broken. This is not, this is not necessarily an overtime process, because we've seen this for the past, I don't know, let's say 30 to 40 years, right? So this is something which should be, we should be going a step-by-step scenario, because we actually see an improvement, in comparison to what we saw 10 to 15 years ago. Any other questions? Yeah, Sanjay.
So, Doji, obviously, you and I both agree on the simple fact that whether a child decides to go to tuition or not is obviously that child's right of choice, and the parents. Obviously, we are not here to debate about that. It was simply my recommendation to select the two. But what I basically wanted to ask you was, I mean, you're a person who worked and, like did your education. That's not something that a lot of people do, and that's not something easy to do, right? So I do have to ask you this. You stressed on the result sheet, qualification based on the result sheet, right? As a person who's employed right now, and as a student as well, I think you're the best person to answer this question. Is it smart to be a student who is basically result sheet centric, or to be work ethic centric? Because to me, I feel like even in the industry you're currently employed at, yes, your result sheet matter, but if your work ethic is horrible, then you won't be able to climb the ladder. And the narrative is, when you outsource your way regarding to your A-level, you outsource and you go to your tuition and all that, it's not necessarily work ethic per se, right? There is a small issue with regards to work ethic, because I think I mentioned to you the issue of the pattern of behavior, where you want to outsource your problems, right? So that's basically my question, and I feel like you're the ideal person to answer this.
Yeah, so basically my idea about it is that, look, right, if you are to talk about, work ethic, if you are to talk about education, leadership skills rather, if you are to, per se talk about organization skills and whatnot, which is highly essential, which are, crucial points that, an interviewer would look into an interview to make sure that he or she can get the job done. So in my speech, which I gave out, literally a few minutes ago, I literally brought out the fact that look, you can simply get the very same thing out of going to school and doing extracurricular activities. Because at the end of the day, Sanjeeva, the truth out there is that sure herself, there is a certain degree of work ethic which is developed inside you by self-studying and whatnot. But mostly, if you look into the bigger picture, Sanjeeva, the problem out there is that you can easily get organization skills, you can get leadership skills out of doing a lot of extracurricular activities, taking leadership in school projects. And the best example that we can bring out right now is us doing MUN and debating, right? Because I'm someone who works in the sales and marketing industry right now, because I see the skills that I enriched out of doing MUN for 3+ years and debating to be really fruitful right now. I'm pretty sure about the fact that those skills that will help me climb about the ladder in the next 2 to 3 years. I'm pretty sure I won't be getting it out of self-studying and whatnot. So yes, you should give a little bit of time. You should actually focus on self-studying and whatnot, because it's very helpful. But still, totally relying on self-studying, devoting your entirety of your time on self-studying and passing an exam and whatnot is going to give you eternal peace, obviously. But still, if you look into the reality side of it, at the end of the day, it's the results that matter, also the skills. And I literally show you the pathway if you want to go enrich those skills. If you are if you are still at school, if you're watching this right now, you obviously would know as to how exactly if you want to get these skills, at what point will these skills be useful. Because one thing before I wrap up, I know I'm taking a lot of time, but this is very important, right? We see students getting blamed when they fail A levels, when they get the results that their parents didn't want to get, just because they devoted a lot of time on their extracurricular activities. Trust me when I say this, those skills will definitely be fruitful to you. Not right now, not in a year, not in a second, not in university years if you get selected to university, but when you actually get into the employment right now, right? Because I see people who've gotten out of huge universities unable to even do something which can be done by someone who, let's say, didn't get the results which is expected, which is below the bar per se, but still have a lot of experience in organizing something, in taking up the leadership in a certain phase. Thank you. So I'll hand over to the next speaker.
Thank you, Dojita. So let me address a few points with regards to what happened in this debate, right? Now, a certain point came up with regards to tuition class and how it builds character if you are able to self-study. Let me remind everyone about this. The hustle is very important. Whether or not you go for tuition classes, the hustle is important. See, if you get up in the morning at 6 o'clock, go to school until 2 o'clock, and if you're still able to go for a tuition class up until 7 o'clock again, you're still studying, whether you're self-learning or not. That in itself builds your character. So with regards to that, what matters at the end of the day is the hustle. Because I've seen people who are able to get really good results during school, during their A levels, and then when they go out to university and job opportunities, they clearly are lost, right? So I agree with Yasanji when he told me about how the self-character thing matters. That's true. But the fact I do disagree with is where you put in your hustle. Because like I said before, you can hustle up to 7 o'clock in the night, study until 11 o'clock, and still, pass your exams. You're doing both, right? That is something that I strongly believe. Now, let me get into my points of the day, right? So, as someone who's done both the national syllabus and the London syllabus, and I'm still doing the London syllabus as well, what I can clearly see is that there are advantages and disadvantages in both, right? So, see, obviously, with what's happening right now, the London syllabus has a multitude of subjects, has an edge where a student is able to decide for themselves where they actually want to go. Because the subjects that they put out, right, is sometimes unheard of in the national syllabus alone. But that doesn't mean that the national syllabus is bad as well. It's just that the national syllabus needs to introduce and think about more things rather than just the basic commerce or science, right? Which is something that we all need to do with regards to reforming the education system as well. But before that whole debate, let me get into this, right? See, when it comes to a student wanting private education in international school, there are two options and two reasons why. One is because their parents have already planned for them to go abroad, to do Cambridge, to do London syllabus and all of those. right? The second reason they do it is because they cannot get into government schools because of the stigma that your parents need to have a certain amount of money, they need to have a certain role in society to get into it. That is the problem with this. And that is why international schools as a whole or private schools are more welcoming to the fact with regards to, they don't really consider that, right? As long as you're able to pay the fee of money. And with that comes a responsibility to deliver quality education instead of just leaving it up to the uniform system, which is something that's very difficult to keep in touch with, right? So with regards to that, there's something else that's commendable about the whole system of private education. See, government schools and schools that follow a uniform syllabus, right, have to keep sticking to it, right? If something that changes in the Western province with regards to education must change in the Northern province or some other province or another school or another place that does not have the same access to technology and facilities as someone in the Western province. While in private schools, it doesn't really matter. Now, see, don't think of it in a way where this is some sort of edge or advantage that private schools have. It is not. Because see, what happens is there is more innovation with regards to private schools and their education system. For example, recent private institutions had adopted the subject of ethics instead of religion because of certain situations that happened within our country, which is something more beneficial to someone than actually being segregated based on it, which is something wrong within our education itself, within our education system as well. Because we are, from the beginning, from grade 1 itself, we are taught to separate from each other based on our ethnicity, our religion, and what we believe in, and our social classes. That is what's wrong with our society. So, in addition to that, I believe that we need to reform the whole system as a whole. Now, I don't mean to say that international schools are all bright and whatnot, and private schools are the same. There could be certain things done better, right? For example, if you compare the overall system with Sri Lanka versus India as a whole, during this lockdown period, we can see India clearly, innovating themselves by having coding as an essential factor within their education system, delivering apps that can be used at home for children from ages 8 to 13. That code, I'm not sure about the name, but that's what they have there. And it's not really difficult, right? With so many systems here that you can easily make this sort of thing happen, right? Because see, in a time of crisis, other countries are more prepared for education than our very own country. And that is because of the simple fact that we are ahead in not only technology, not only content, but also the level of innovation that we put into the subject quality of and the effort we put into actually delivering the subject of education, because it means much more than simply a result sheet or what you do after. Are there any questions? Yeah, Sanjeev?
So, Rehan, with regards to how there's this inherent discrimination towards basically international school students, or for that matter, private university students, do you think perhaps the reason to it, as you mentioned, is that right now the local system is basically one size fits all, right? That's the kind of method that they're going for. Whereas the international system caters for customization. Do you think that perhaps what needs to happen is that there needs to be customization to the local system as well?
Yes, look, so Yasanji, I've done both syllabuses, right? And what I believe is that the national syllabus is in itself very essential for a Sri Lankan citizen. Because me personally, I'm Muslim, right? But I've read stories of, Guttila Kavya and all those essential stories that we need to know. I've learned Sri Lankan history, which is beautiful, which makes me proud to be Sri Lankan, right? Some places don't get that, right? See, that is not only a problem in the international schools and national schools as well, right? The problem is in uniformity. See, if we agreed, see, the problem with I believe with our Sri Lankan education system is we are too proud to admit that we don't need to move on with things. See, the simple fact that our syllabus changes every 7 years in the national syllabus is something that's way too slow. technology evolves faster than that. 7 years ago, we did not have Windows 10. That's why we need to keep changing things and adapt to the pace. Yes, Vishnu.
Rehan, do you think that in accordance with my understanding, as far as I know, the international syllabus does not, private schools which follow the international syllabus does not actually teach one's own history, right? So do you think that subjects like the history of Sri Lanka and one's own religion should be taught in school? Do you think that's essential?
So, Vishmi, with regards to that, see, the London syllabus as a whole starts with grade 8 up and then grade 10 and A levels and so on, which is, yeah, O levels and A levels, so on. So, up until that, I believe that, and it is up to a school to come up with a syllabus and, do their sort of examinations and make sure that their students learn, right? So, this does not mean that, it definitely should be there, even in international schools, whether you learn a different country's thing, you should know both, a little bit of both, because it not only helps you learn to appreciate your own history, but it also helps you understand some like things that are necessary, global information, right? So it is up to a school, right? See, I'm blessed to have gone to an institution that has that very same policy of having Sri Lankan history and international history, which at the end of the day gives out a better cultural understanding than some other places. Yes, Dojita.
One small question when it comes to you, bro, may bring in about the question of religion versus Sunday schools. Yes, because it's funny to say that, look, although a certain utopia exists, that Sunday schools exist, yes, and people are actually supposed to go to it, but if statistically speaking, not even 30 to 40%, not even 30 to 40% of the kids out there would ever, go to a Sunday school, right? So that trickles down to the fact that the only place where you can actually learn about religion will be your school. Sure, the ethical factor should be, the whole case about ethics should be brought into syllabus, right? But taking out the whole subject of religion in the first place up until the lower middle half of your secondary education won't that necessarily backfire you, considering the situation in the country right now, where if you stop it hypothetically, you won't be getting the education at all?
See, the problem there, Rojita, is in itself, right? Because see, what a place teaches is like the situation I brought up before, uniformity. There needs to be uniformity in order to ensure quality in education. See, if something is not attractive to learn enough, no one's going to learn it anyway, right? And if there's not enough opportunity in it, people are again not going to come into it. See, education in the market, there's a marketing mix for education as well, right? Product, price, place, promotion. Place is something important. If you walk out your door right now, within your neighborhood, you will find Sunday schools for all religions that you find, most places actually, right? So there is access to it, but there's clearly no uniformity in it.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that basically concludes our topic. So I think basically, I think at this point I can speak for literally everyone here, that I think we all came in with the preconceived notion, an opinion, right? And see, this is why we decided to do this project, because obviously it's not just a matter of conflicting opinion, it's a matter of understanding. I, for one, believe that self-education is key, right? Self-study. Now, obviously, after what Vishmi specifically vehemently pointed out about, and what Dojita's experience, kind of explained to me, is that you need to have that balanced life, and that's the same thing that Rehan pointed out. And I would like to also point out that we have a lot of diversity within the members here, because see, Vishmi happens to be a first-year university student. Rehan happens to be a person who has done both national and London syllabus. I happen to be a person doing my third year, which means I'm about to go into the work life. And we have Dojita, who already is basically a person who's employed, who's already part of that work life. So whatever we say basically is from our own experience, is from our own ideology, and the reason why we come together is, not just to bring you guys debates, not just, to argue, but also to understand one another. And I think that's what we did. Because right now, obviously, my opinion about school education is quite different, I would say. And I'm thankful for my boardroom members as well for basically explaining that. And with that, we would like to conclude for this session. We hope that you had an entertaining debate. We hope that you enjoyed it. We will post an Instagram vote as to what you think, whether you believe that school state education is more valuable for a student rather than private education. We'll put up a vote. We'll see what you guys think about it. On our end, we are all in agreement that what is necessary to tackle 21st century challenges is basically balancing it. And I think that's something that Rojita very correctly pointed out through his experience. And that's about it, guys. Thank you, Rehan Malik, Vishmi Silva, and Rojita Atapathu for today's session. We hope to see you guys soon.